Hi, this is Shab with LoveToCode.com. Welcome back to another tutorial on Java JDBC. In this video, we'll learn how to use transactions with JDBC. We will first define what transactions are. Then we'll learn how to develop transactions with JDBC. For this tutorial, we'll use the following table, employees. The table also has sample data for testing. I have a SQL script that will create the table and add sample data for you. You can download it from the link below. A transaction is basically a unit of work. You can execute multiple statements together. Based on your application, if everything is okay, all of the statements are executed together. This is known as a commit. If there's a problem, then none of the statements are executed. This is known as a rollback. In the diagram, if it is okay to save, then we commit the statements to the database. If it is not okay to save, then we roll back, effectively throwing away the changes. By default, auto commit is set to true. You have to explicitly turn it off to set auto commit to false. At this point, the developer controls the commit and rollback. This is very straightforward. If you want to commit, then you call the commit method. Likewise, if you want to roll back, then you call the rollback method. That's it. So let's look at this with a code snippet. At the beginning, we set auto commit to false. Then we can perform multiple SQL statements like insert, updates, and deletes. Next, we can ask the user if it's okay to save. This is simply a call to a helper method that will get input from the user. It returns a Boolean value of true or false. Then if okay, we commit. Else we roll back. Okay, so let's switch over to Eclipse and see this in action. I have a simple Java program called Transaction Demo. For the transaction in this example, we're going to do the following. The first thing we're going to do is delete all HR employees, and then we'll update the engineering salaries to $300,000. Pretty funny. So let's walk through the code. The first thing we'll do is we'll go through and get a connection to the database. We will turn off auto commit by setting it to false. And then just for sanity's sake, we're going to make use of a helper routine called show salaries. And it's going to print out the salaries for the HR and engineering departments. And it'll actually connect to the database and perform a query and get those results accordingly and display them. Then we move into our actual transaction part of it. So for our first transaction step, we're going to execute an update. In this case, we're going to actually do a delete from employees where department equals HR. So this is where we delete all HR employees. Then we'll move to the next transaction step, and we'll actually set the salaries to $300,000 for all engineering employees. Nice feature. Then we'll tell the user the transaction steps are ready. And then we're going to prompt the user if it's okay to save. So this is just a little simple helper method that's just going to read the user input. If the user enters yes, it's going to return true. If the user enters anything else, like no, it'll return false. So if it's okay, then we will commit the data in the database, and we'll print out transaction committed. Else, we'll roll back the information. And then also, finally, as another sanity check, we'll print the salaries after this step of code. So we'll print out the information for HR and for engineering. Okay, so I just ran the application, and we'll just go look at the output here. So at the beginning, we display the salaries before, so information for the HR department, and also the salaries for the engineering department. It tells us that the transaction steps are ready. Is it okay to save? Yes or no. So at this point, I'm going to say no, and I'll hit enter. Then it's going to go through and it's going to tell us, hey, the transactions were rolled back. And also, as a sanity's sake, they're going to display the salaries after. So here's information for HR. So we know the transaction didn't execute because we were trying to delete HR employees, but they're still here in our database. And then a similar thing here for engineering, we were trying to increase all the salaries to 300,000, but again, they're still at their original values. So we know that the transaction was rolled back successfully. All right, so let's also verify this in our SQL tool. So what I'll do is I'll move over to the SQL tool. I have a query here that's going to select from employees, and we're basically going to select for employees in the HR and engineering department. I'll go ahead and execute this query. We can see that we have 8 employees that were returned. We have 4 in the engineering department. They have their original salaries, and also we have people in the HR department that are still there. So we know that there were no changes made to the actual database. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch back over to the Eclipse tool, and let's run it. And this time, let's apply the transaction. So I'll just run the application one more time. And at this point, it's going to prompt me, and here I'll say yes. And note the difference. It says transaction committed, the salaries after and show salaries for HR. It's empty because we've deleted all the HR employees. And then also the salaries for engineering, they're all 300,000. So this transaction was actually applied and committed to the actual database. Again, I can confirm this in my MySQL tool. So I'll just tab over to that window for MySQL. I will run this query one more time. So instead of 8 employees, I only have 4 because the HR employees were deleted. And note here the salaries for the engineering department is at 300,000. So we were successful in actually applying all this information to the database. Good job. Well, that wraps up our discussion on transactions with JDBC. We were successful in using transactions for commits and rollbacks.